What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from the Alto again, and for the first time since 2019, we return with Brandon of Bleeding Through. Great to have you back. Thanks for coming back on the show today.
Thank you for having me back on, man.
Yeah.
It's been a minute.
I know, it's been a minute, and there's a lot I want to uncover. First thing is always first, we got to get the good old promotional stuff out of the way, but the new Bleeding Through album, 9, coming out very soon. Epic record. Can't wait for the rest of the world to hear it. Being that this is the second record to come back post-hiatus, if you will, was this intended to just be sort of like just a continuation of Love Will Kill All, or is 9 new uncharted territory and exposing sides of Bleeding Through that we haven't seen before?
Well, I mean, I feel like when we put Level Kill All out, we were kind of like back on a roll playing shows and kind of just getting more acquainted being back like in the mix of like being like a working band again. And it was, unfortunate on many levels for COVID, obviously. But I don't know, man. Like, it's kind of weird. Like, I don't feel, it's not like it was like a second kind of attempt at a comeback, but it kind of felt that way a little bit. Only really in the sense of when we came back after COVID, like 2022, started playing shows again. We released the Rage EP and stuff like that. Even that was like, it just felt different for us. And I think it's a kind of a product of like how like society was at the time, coming out of the pandemic, things that we like maybe took for granted. I think everybody took a lot of stuff for granted in their life, that when they didn't have, like they started to appreciate it a little bit more, when it was back. And, I felt like that alone right there kind of gave us like this almost like renewed spirit. And I feel like we kind of came back in 2022 harder than we did in 2019.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, it felt different. It felt like it's always meant so much to us, but in this regard, like it just meant more. It felt like it meant more this time.
I very much agree with it. I very much agree. Like, I love Love Will Kill All. It was, a fantastic album. It's sort of sentimental to me because that was, like, the first Bleeding Through album to come out during my time working in press and working in the industry.
Yeah.
So it was great to almost be like, oh, man, I could maybe witness Bleeding Through the lost times that I've had. But then you come back with this album, and it's just an absolute rager, pun somewhat intended. I wanted to ask if that previous EP was meant to be kind of like a preview or sort of like a trailer of what is to come from Bleeding Through.
I think the Rage EP was like sort of like this bridge, right? Where we were sort of kind of getting more into like, I think that record or those songs were a little bit more like symphonic and orchestral. We were starting to dabble a little bit more into that like level of things, introducing Marta more to singing on parts and stuff like that and having her own stuff. But we switched producers since like that Rage EP to the full length, and we started. It felt like that alone right there was sort of just like this thing where we wanted to really we wanted to push ourselves, like switching over like producers and stuff like that was, some bands, we've always had different producers work with different records, but we had the producer that did Rage EP for like Love Will Kill All, and The Great Fire, and Mick Kinney, I worked with him with a bunch of stuff. So having him kind of step away and working with Aaron Shaparian, I think it was a new mind that's really helped as far as like helping us reach like a limit of like atmospheric, orchestral, musical, like very symphonic elements of the band that we always really wanted to push forward a little bit more, but still maintaining like the absolute heaviness of Bleeding Through. And so I feel like that was really like a key thing of why that happened.
I think Bleeding Through has always been a band that's been ahead of its time. And this led me perfectly into what I wanted to ask you, because one of my greatest concert memories, talking about making up for lost time, was seeing you guys play This Is Love, This Is Murderous in full at in Brooklyn. That was a magical experience to have. It was truly fun to have. Mentioning that sort of symphonic element, I feel like Bleeding Through was really like, we see it so much now with the rise of bands like Lorna Shore and Shadow of Intent and whatnot, but it seemed like Bleeding Through was really one of the first bands to kind of like a lot of bands in your scene back in the day with you know,
Yeah.
like the Suicide Silences, the As I Lay Dyings, the Avenged Sevenfolds, and Atreyus. Like that wasn't really seen so much in that scene. So I feel like Bleeding Through was really one of the first bands to sort of test the waters with that sound. Like when you listen to City of the Condemned or something like that.
Yeah. Honestly, like I would like to be humble and say, oh no, I totally disagree, but yeah, absolutely, you're fucking right. So I mean, it is. I mean, if you, it's like, you know, people ask like, do you think you're the first to do this? I'm like, well, who else was doing it? We were the first to do it. I didn't know any other. The only other band that I ever saw that had a keyboard player in our genre after we had one, and I don't even think it was after. I think they had one at the same time, but was Under Oath. You know, so I give props to like a band like Under Oath too, who actually had like a keyboard player in the band as well.
Yeah.
And then you saw like more and more bands, and I think we opened up. I don't really necessarily think we opened up the window to have keyboard players in the band, because that's a whole nother thing. That's hard to do. That's like an element that's like you have to find another person that is, you know, going to share your life with you. You know what I mean? But I think we opened it up to having that element amongst like the whatever brand of metalcore, whatever we were playing. And yeah, I mean, it's cool. I mean, we've gotten props from bands like Lorna Shore and stuff like that that have said that it's influenced them and all that kind of stuff like that, which is awesome. But yeah, like I will give us sort of not all the props, but I'll give us major props for being one of the first bands to have like keyboards in our band.
100%. I mean, cause I've noticed that like metalcore has gotten more epic in the sense that like it's becoming more like a lot of the metalcore movements, you know, they started off playing, you know, the DIY VFW halls, you know, and
Yeah.
you know, like having that real raw hardcore grit to it. So like I guess to like a lot of hardcore kids, the idea of a keyboard being incorporated to them is sickening. But like I think
Yeah.
that metalcore has become, I mean, look at it now. Parkway Drive is doing a show at their opera house in Australia.
Yeah, that's
So,
crazy.
like, so like it seems like metalcore has become like a classic genre, if you will.
I mean, it as well as it should. I mean, as much of like the waves of it feeling like this taboo fucking label, like, yeah, we're like, we've never called ourselves a metalcore band, but like when we started, we're not like, hey, we're gonna do a metalcore. You know what I mean? I don't even know what the fuck we were. Like, we were just bleeding through, and I still kind of think that. But if you're gonna identify us with any sort of like label, that is the label that I'm proud to like wave. Like, if we were one of the pioneers of like that shit, along with like bands like Darkest Hour and Unearth and, you know, fucking Shadows Fall and a million fucking other awesome bands, then that's great. And I do think that label in popularity has stood a test of time and produced such good bands over the years that have been very influential. Like, you know, when bands like us did like Ozfest in '04, that was like a fucking revolution. Like, that straight up was like, they're letting these bands that literally 2 months ago, you say VFW halls, 2 months ago we're playing VFW halls, and you're putting them on this fucking tour. Like, this is gonna fucking start something. And I remember like after that, like metalcore was so like big because a lot of those bands identified with that. And I thought that was really cool. So I do think it should be something that's up there with like, you know, you talk about hardcore, you talk about metal. It's like, what are the categories? Like, how many subcategories of everything are there?
Yeah.
And it's like with metalcore, dude, it stood this test of time, and it's still ripping out really big bands. Like, you know, like bands like Knocked Loose and fucking, you know, whether they call themselves that or not, they have called themselves that. And like bands like Motionless in White and like, you know, all that shit. Like, those bands are still waving that banner, and it's like, it's awesome, man.
Definitely.
So I do think it should be like a staple genre.
But when it comes to the history of the genre, This Is Love, This Is Murderous, it's up there with classics such as Of Malice in the Magnum Heart, The End of Heartache, The Fall of Ideals, The Curse, you name it. I think it is a classic album in that sense. Going back, playing This Is Love, This Is Murderous, do you think that the context of that album like has grown with you over time? Do you like play those songs and feel like this is the branded who I am now and this is what the songs mean to me? Or did it almost feel like you were going back in time, and did it almost feel like the 2003 version of you revisited?
I like to reflect a lot before we play, and I try to pull myself. What I do is I guess like my energy source when we play and sort of emotion comes from really just pulling all the emotions of like how I was feeling, how I currently feel, the journey that we've been on, our love for each other, our friendship. I bring that out, like our love for our fans and the loyalty. I pull that all in. So like, I really try to live in that moment of when I was writing that song. And I'd like to transport myself back to how I was then and try to rip those emotions out of me again. You know what I mean? So every song is really coming from like the true emotion of how it was written.
And when you formed Bleeding Through, we touched upon it the last time we spoke, and I asked you like how different of a creative process it was. But like coming from 18 Visions to Bleeding Through, being that you played guitar with 18 Visions and now being a frontman and Bleeding Through, have you expressed a different side of yourself with your voice versus with the riffs that you played?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I feel like that was when I could finally express myself, really. And, the bands that I sort of came up loving had like darker lyrics and they spoke to me more than like the most like more like positive stuff that was around through like the hardcore scene and shit like that. So, with riffs and stuff like that, like it's definitely an expression and it's more of like to me, it's more like a feel. It's more like a feeling thing. But like with my lyrics, that's when I realized it was more of an emotional attachment, emotional sort of connection to people that were like the first time I saw people screaming my lyrics back to me, like that was like, what the fuck? Like that was the craziest thing ever. That's, I think, when I realized that like where my true emotion like kind of lies and like where the true like delivery of where that emotion comes from.
So this is the first time I'm asking this question. I'm kind of test driving it with you. So a lot of times when I ask an artist about a new album and they say, this is the album we always wanted to make, this is the album I was able to foresee. Look, we don't know where we're going to be 25 years from when we first start our band. The life in the future is unpredictable in that sense. So could you really say that what we're hearing on 9 was the vision that you had during the early days of Bleeding Through in a way? Or could you really say that in the sense? Or better yet, is there still a part of the hardcore kid that you've always been since getting into your scene that you are carrying with you over time? Because we all grow and we all adult one way or another, whether you say it or not.
Honestly, I could legitimately say that this record is like everything that I envisioned it being from the absolute beginning. From the beginning of this band, it was like I wanted to take a band like Integrity and a band like fucking Cradle of Filth, and I wanted to smash them together. And it's like, that's what this is. I've always wanted it to be this like epic sounding and this like musical, I guess. You know what I mean? Like I've always had this vision for it, and I really do feel like this is like the total fucking, at least as of now, like the truest version of our band. Like the one thing that like we've really wanted to get across, and I feel like fuck, dude. Like people will sit here and be like humble about their records, but we fucking nailed it, dude. Like we just nailed it.
You definitely did.
I'm sorry, like. If you listen to that record and tell me it's a bad record, you're just trying to fucking hate us, like straight up. Like, I have so many people that I'm friends with that do not like my band, and are like, "This is the best thing you put out." Like, it is meaningful, it's fucking truthful, it is completely raw yet so fucking musical and polished at the same time, and it's like, it is what we've always wanted to be. It really is. Like,
do you think
we are very proud of this record, man. Like we really feel that like there's something in this record for everybody. Like there's a piece of your emotion and the reason why you listen to this type of shit that you could fucking pull out of this record.
Do you think that has to do with, your writing as, I'm not going to assume your age, but like you're writing as more of an adult now than you were? Because, Dust to Ashes or, Portrait of the Goddess, like, we were all young, not to make you feel old, but like I was 8 when Dust to Ashes came out. No, I was 7 when Dust to Ashes came out, or maybe even
shit.
So sorry, but like
that's all right.
I was a little boy, and I love that album now, but I discovered it. I was a late bloomer. I discovered it when I was like 15 or 16 when I started getting into the genre. So like moving forward, like I kind of lost track of the question, but like, do you think that like there's always gonna be a hardcore kid in you? Like, because somebody tells me like key to being in this genre is we never grow up. You're not supposed to grow up, but I think that's gonna happen one way or another. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, that those like early feelings and like reasons and kind of like memories are always going to be in me. Like I am always like a hardcore kid. Like I would rather go to a show in a small venue than be at a big venue. Like part of the allure of the whole thing is the human interaction, the flesh and blood of the bands that are playing, like just all that stuff. You know what I mean? Like bands are right there. It's a small connection. I'll always be drawn to that. And our music is sort of like an evolution of that, of like that too. But we always like for the song I Am Resistance, like that is a straight up hardcore song that I fucking wrote. Like, well, I wrote it like a few years back, but like, yeah, it is like it's sort of like or to me, it sounds like our version of what like Orange County hardcore is. Like, that's what that is to me. Like, and yeah, like I'll always carry that. Like, I'll always carry like the way that like I feel, and like I'll always want it to be like a dream for me. I don't think I'll ever like grow out of like wanting to learn and expand and dream a different sound, or dream that your sound can be progress more and stuff like that. But I do think that our age has given us we don't give a fuck about much when it comes to writing our music. We care about making sure that everybody individually gets to put their stamp on the record and put their sort of like their vibe into it. We care that when we listen to it, we can fucking feel it, and we care that our fucking fans back it, and that's something that they're proud in. And I know and I've spoken about this a bunch, but I know a bunch of people say that like they don't write the music for the fans, and that's fine. Like we write music for ourselves as well, but this is for like pride in what we built over 25 years. And that was in our minds when we were writing this record. This record is supposed to be meaningful for us, but it's supposed to be meaningful for the people that have been along for the journey with us. You know what I mean? It's for everybody that may have never thought that, you know, we could last this long, but have stuck with us. They may have been ups and downs where they don't like certain records and they like certain records, but they've still stuck with us. We wanted this record to just be that like unifying thing, or a reunification that we sort of felt with something like This Is Love, This Is Murderous. We felt everybody in our whole like kind of genre and seeing the people that support us could unify into that record. And then of course, when there's that one record, there's split opinions on everything else through the whole record, through the band's journey, and you get the whole Metallica conversation all the time. So you know what I mean? So it's like one of those things. But we really feel like this record, we really wanted to put the emphasis in, like, this is a reunification. Like, this is, yes, it's 25 years of bleeding through, but I want this to feel like we're a fucking new old band.
And
you know what I mean?
You definitely succeeded in that. I wanted to talk. You definitely hit the nail on the head. I think it has a unifying aspect behind it. And I think that never went away. I think every album has demonstrated that, and you've been able to demonstrate it more as like just the adult version of who you are now. There's a couple more questions I wanted to ask for you, and that is one circling back to your lyrics. Last time I spoke to you, I asked if you needed to hear the music to come up with lyrics, but I know that you've talked a lot of personal subjects, and there's a lot of internal sources of inspiration and a lot of external sources of inspiration. Depending on what you're singing about, does it maybe resonate with you in a different level, or do you maybe channel a different energy into the song depending on the subject matter?
Never thought about that actually. But now thinking of like this record and like the way that like my performance is, probably like I know I use more of like a high registry in songs that are more like, to me, like vicious and like sort of like aggressive. And I know the more like emotional ones, I kind of use like my normal like low sort of like mono, like mid registry. And I know it's kind of weird to think about, but maybe there is some truth to that. Maybe like I feel like expressing like songs that are more like aggressive to society a certain way, into songs that are more important to me mentally a different way. I don't know. Might be onto something. I might have to review this.
Maybe. Who knows if I
Left
tapped
up
into.
to review.
Yeah. Well, because sometimes I ask, regardless if it's something from more like personal trials or tribulations, or
Yeah.
talking about the evils of a modern day society or whatnot.
Yeah.
We sing about subject matter that is uncomfortable for people to talk about. That's why we express it in the genre that we do.
Yeah.
So, do you find that sometimes we can though become victimized by our own product in that sense? So, has the songwriting process always been cathartic and unleashing that energy, or do you find that maybe it can be just as deteriorating at the same time?
I felt like this record was both. I felt like a lot of the lyrics that I was writing for this, and this has happened before. Like Declaration was one of these records too. But my mindset for both records, Declaration and this record, I think that those are the two records that are the most similar. Declaration is probably the most similar to this record, and I think our mentalities were like kind of in the same positions. But as far as like, cathartic meets like draining, this record was kind of both. There's a lot of stuff that I was writing for this record that kind of brought up some old trauma that maybe I've buried or forgotten about or haven't revisited in a long time. That was very draining. I think I was very stressed out during this process of this record, because a lot of the lyrics were sort of like more on the draining side of it, just really just dumping a lot of like old kind of like feels towards like a lot of these lyrics. But some of it was cathartic, and I think the cathartic part of it was at the end of it, hearing the product. That's when the catharsis kind of kicked in. That's what really was like listening to it and hearing it as like come at me. That's when it felt like more cathartic.
Do you look for inspiration? Can you actually go and seek it out, or do you just have to let it strike you?
I just have to let it strike me. I just have to like, if I'm listening to a song, like a song can kind of trigger where I can kind of start. But really, dude, like how I wrote this one was I would hear the song first. I always write, but I hear the song first, and then I just kind of freestyle lyrics, and I'll just start with like one or two like lines, right? And I'll kind of just go with that. And usually that like first instinct of like those words coming out of me or onto paper during that track is typically the right way
And
for me.
And you let me perfectly into the final question because, in the end, as somebody who's now seen Bleeding Through on 2 occasions, epic time, and that energy that you portray and that your audience portrays, it's truly an experience. But then you have to go to a recording studio to track this stuff. And I've been in recording studios before. It's a very static, very controlled environment. I would say that after an interrogation room at a police station is a recording studio. And there's high-end gear that you have to watch out for. So how do you take that emotional energy and execute it in an environment like that?
It's hard. I really struggle with recording. Like I am not a good person in the studio because I don't care for my voice very well. Like I know how to scream like one way and that's like 100% and so sometimes I need to feel it, and sometimes it takes a little bit to kind of get to a point where you can hear it and stuff like that to feel it, but it takes me a little bit. Like I'm not like, once I hit my stride I'm good to go, but it takes me a while to get that stride to where I can start really feeling it. And especially again, like on this record, that was something I struggled with. It wasn't until like I went to Tim Lambesis' studio where I started to feel comfortable recording lyrics and vocals, and that's where I recorded the whole record.
Wow. I mean, because again, like I never understood vocal, whether they're singing hardcore or they're singing R&B. It's such a static environment. I feel like it's almost, that's the real test of a frontman when you're in that studio.
It's brutal, dude. I really don't like it. I do not enjoy it.
Yeah.
That's the difference of like bands now and bands like from our age is like recording was fun but hard. Now it's like, now bands kind of become bands by recording first instead of playing. So like bands are used to like, recording their vocals. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where for me, it was like always just like, I don't know, just wasn't comfortable.
Yeah, and I think the biggest difference is too, and I'm not gonna say like, oh, it's not like how it used to be anymore. I don't believe in that.
Dude, it's all good, man. It's just different processes. If I was coming up now, I would do the same fucking thing because why not use the resources that are there? You know what I mean? It's there was nothing for us other than like just completely destroying your fucking vocals. You know what I mean?
But very rarely, like I've asked you this the last time we spoke, but coming from the same scene as 18 Visions and and As I Lay Dying, Avenged Sevenfold, and all these bands, or, Kill Switch coming from the same scene as Unearth and All That Remains and Diecast and all that, so like, or the Tampa death metal scene or the Gothenburg death metal scene, like I feel like scenes are not really something that bands cultivated. I interviewed like a lot of modern day metalcore bands. Some of them have members in Europe, some of them have members across the coast, and like a lot of them are more technically driven. They're not starting off, in the VFW halls and whatnot. So I think that is like a lot of monocore bands. I'm not gonna. Actually, I will, because I'm not saying it like it's a bad thing. But a great metalcore band like Currents, for example, is not saying, oh, I remember, attending, shows with Lorna Shore back in the day. Like it doesn't seem like that, if that makes sense.
Well, I think that there's, in the metalcore genre of things, there isn't, at least in that genre. I know in hardcore, there's still very pride in like where you're from and the scene and building together and all that kind of shit. But like for like metalcore and stuff, I think with the commercialization of it is stop being this like sort of more underground prideful thing. You know what I mean? So it's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's weird that there's no like, we're always like Bleeding Through from Orange County. Like bands will just say their band name and they're from like 50 different places. You know what I mean?
Yep.
It's weird.
Which is cool. I just think it's the product.
It is cool. So at least they get to be a band, which is cool.
Exactly. So before we go, I want to thank you so much, not only for your time, but for another amazing album, and thank you for 25 years, a quarter of a century of Bleeding Through, and that led. Sorry, I make everybody feel old. It's sort of like my gimmick, but
it's all right.
But before we go, anything else you'd like to promote? Being that it is 25 years of Bleeding Through, you did already perform a classic album in its entirety back in 2023. So, what can we be expecting for Bleeding Through in the near future?
I mean, we really want to promote this new record, and I know people are going to be we're never going to bum people out. We're never going to just play a set of our new shit, but be prepared to hear some of the shit. So buy this record, buy it. Don't buy it. Go fucking stream it. No, buy the vinyl. Get the vinyl because it's cool as fuck. But yeah, dude, just, let this record transform you back to like the years where this fucking like really meant something to you, and you'll fucking feel this vibe for sure.
Definitely. I can't wait to. I'm gonna be able to say that I go back to 2025 with that Bleeding Through album. So that's
hell yeah.
Yep. But thank you so much, everybody. We are here with Bleeding Through. Be sure to check out 9. This is Alex from Heavy New York, and we will see you next time.
Fuck yeah, thanks, Alex.